So, what's a computer? Well, to be called a computer, a device needs three things. The first thing it needs is a processor. That's the brain of a computer. That's the bit that does all the thinking, the number crunching, and the handling, the ones and zeros. The next thing a computer needs is memory. This is where it can store information and store instructions that we give it. And the last thing a computer needs is input and output, a way for us to give the computer instructions and a way for the computer to give us information. So you can see here lots of different computers. They all have input and output, a mouse and a screen. They have processors and they have memory. Even that wooden one in the center that you can see here, that's called the difference engine, and it was invented by a guy called Charles Babbage in the 1800s, about 100 years before electricity was invented. So it's a mechanical computer, but it has a processor that's made of gears, made of brass and wood. It has memory, and it has input and output. Now, this computer doesn't play any games, but it is a very sophisticated calculator for doing quite complex maths. Now, the very first electronic computer, you can see it here, it is absolutely massive. It takes up an entire room and requires a whole team of people to operate it. And it was made in 1943 during the Second World War. And it was designed to crack codes to help the Allied forces defeat the Axis forces during the war. But the very first computer program, it wasn't written for this machine. It's actually written 100 years before that machine was made by a lady called Ada Lovelace, and she wrote code for the difference engine, this wooden machine. The way things were back in the 1800s, people used to have dinner parties, and Ada Lovelace was at a dinner party held by Charles Babbage, and he was showing off his computer. But Ada Lovelace was a bit of a maths genius, and while Charles Babbage was showing all the things that his computer could do, she realized that he didn't know all the things that his computer could do. So she went home and she wrote instructions to help show people that this computer was able to do much more complicated calculations than they even thought it could in the first place. Now, a fun fact about computers is that during the 1940s, when they were first being invented, well, this is during wartime, and it was during a time when women weren't allowed to serve in the military alongside men. So most of the figuring things out with computers was done by women. You can see here there's Ada Lovelace, who wrote the first computer program when she was just 17 years old. And beside her is Grace Hooper, and she's the woman responsible for designing the first compiler, which meant that we didn't have to write in ones and zeros for computers to understand. Down on the bottom, beside the big stack of books, that's a woman called Margaret Hamilton. And she led the team that wrote the code that landed the first moon lander on the moon. And actually, that stack of books is the code that landed the moon lander on the moon in 1969. And beside her, you can see Margaret Hamilton again. That's her being given the President's Award by President Obama. Now, we've talked about code, but we haven't seen any. So let's take a look now. Thanks to Grace Hooper, we can write code using words, and it doesn't need to be in ones and zeros for computers to understand. And that means that we have many different coding languages now, and they're all designed to do things in slightly different ways. So if you're looking at a website, you might be looking at code written in Python. If you're using a vending machine in your school, it's probably using C++. And I don't know about you, but if I look at this code, I can find it kind of intimidating. I might not be too sure of what it's saying. But just like with learning any language, the more familiar you get with the vocabulary, like learning Irish, the easier it gets to understand things like this. Now, before you get started with your coding, there's one thing we want to remind you, and that is that computer science isn't about doing loads of maths or following the steps perfectly. It's actually about logic, thinking step by step, problem solving, and creativity. There are so many different ways to solve every problem out there, and your code and your solutions are going to be different from anyone else's. So don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to try different things and see what happens. Okay, guys, have fun.